Okay, everyone, I think I am ready to start adding some color. I'm going to paint the color under the line, starting off with just blocking in barred shapes. I'm not going to worry too much about things aligning perfectly. I'm not going to get bogged down in making clean selections. I'm aiming for something that might have more expressive quality, something that maybe references what's that called? Printmaking. Okay. Interestingly enough, this carrot is a red carrot. It looks pretty orange, but I know it's a red carrot. It's just really dry, and so its hue should be similar to the bright red of the bell pepper. Now, our eyes, when we're looking at the screen versus looking at the subject, they can also surprise us. So the best way to get accurate color is to sample directly from a photograph of the image. And it's totally okay to do that. So I'm going to get my brush tool, eyedropper tool, and sample this color, and then transfer it to its own layer. I'm going to sample this sort of middle brown. And I think this is the red of the carrot. And then I made a decision to have the board be kind of in the yellow range now, because my light is a warm light, has a warm light source. So, and then lastly, the shadows were something I can look at a little later, try to figure out. So these swatches are the result of sampling directly from the artwork. And there will always be surprises. I might look at this little bit where the mushroom's stalk is getting some light. I'm expecting it to be, there it is, that's the color I was looking for. It's very similar to the color of a palette based on what the camera picked up. Sometimes there will be surprises, in the highlights. So I would have expected this to be close to a pink, which it is. And then the lighter colors for the carrot, and then the shadow colors for the carrot, kind of the brown, shadow colors for the mushroom, and then the shadow colors for the bell pepper itself, and even the shadows that we cast. Okay, there's a surprise. So the shadows on the bell pepper itself, they're sampling and giving me a more saturated color than the cast shadow from that vegetable. Now, as I go through and sample these individual ones, look at what's happening with the hue slider. I'm staying within this red range for the hue, and the saturation and brightness is shifting with this dot within that triangle. Okay, so these are the true colors. Put these over here. And then there are the colors that I guessed at. So let's go down here, make those visible. So I'm pretty close, with some of them, and that is a result of spending many hours drawing and painting from observation and using the pigments that are available in, most painting kits, whether it's professional grade or student grade. There's just a handful of popular, commonly used reds, blues, yellows, greens, and earth tones, and plus white and brown. So I guessed pretty well just looking at these objects here in front of me. So again, learning about color theory, there are lots of ways of approaching the psychology of color, using color in a composition. It's an exercise, just an observation. I'd argue that it's more important to just get used to seeing color in different lighting conditions, mixing that color with traditional media, or in this case, if you're working with the tablet, try to choose the color from your color picker based on observation and then maybe cross-referencing that against sampling color from a natural photo. Right? And that way you're always have one foot in the digital world and another foot in the real, in the natural world. All right, so I have plenty of colors here to work with for my first pass with the color. Let me hide my sketch. Where are you? Okay, here's the background. Guess I'll use this as sort of a base now. So keep it up to 100. And let's see. Paint layer. I'll say color. All right, so if these steps are starting to feel a little repetitive, I've already seen that, good, because that's what I want. I want you all to start seeing a process that can be repeated and adjusted as needed. Same thing with the drawing. I really encourage you all to start learning to approach drawing in a much more, if you need those skills. And I arrived at this approach when I was really honest with myself and I said, I learned a lot, I drew a lot in school, but I'm not happy with the work that I'm doing. So how can I'm looking at work out there by other artists that is just mind-blowing. I get jealous, I kind of dismiss it as, well, they're looking at a photograph or they have some unfair advantage. No, not necessarily. It's just there's an approach. You've got to figure out what's the secret formula. What is the strategy or the technique that would lead to that kind of work. And because if people have been doing this for hundreds of years, depending on which era you're looking at, then it can probably be learned. It was taught back in the 1800s, 1700s. I'm sure it can be taught today. Our technology has improved. Paint quality, you don't have to grind your own pigments anymore. So the access to tools and resources, not that much of an issue, but the actual learning, I think you'll find that for a number of reasons, you can spend a lot of time and a lot of money in school and not necessarily come out the other end with a good foundation. You might imagine getting an engineering degree and still struggling with arithmetic. So similarly with these methods, with the art, or given art practice, if your goal is to achieve the ability to draw from observation, to draw accurately, then you find yourself in a situation where you didn't get that skills, you got to go get them, you got to go find them somewhere. I mention this because this is a story that I've heard again and again from students, from professionals, and I always go something like this. They go to art school because there's a particular kind of art they want to do. Maybe it's illustration, maybe it's they want to paint realistically. And then they go to art school and they find that no one's really teaching how to do that stuff anymore. There's an emphasis on art that is maybe more conceptual, art that fits newer markets, art that's more contemporary. And you kind of get hammered into, kind of reshapen into an artist who works in a different way, and eventually you may have success working in that thing. You may find yourself getting a little discouraged and frustrated. So some artists found themselves after kind of slogging through a 4-year degree, maybe even a master's degree, they may find themselves returning to classes to learn how to draw. And I've had people approach me at City College that literally say, I didn't learn how to draw, I didn't learn how to paint. No one taught me anything. They just said, here's a studio space, here's a studio time, here are the mediums, but I'm not going to show you how to do it. You've got to figure out your own way of working, your own way of thinking with these mediums, because this realism stuff isn't hot like it was maybe in the 17th century. So, but then we're thinking, well, what about all those gorgeous science fiction book covers out there? This is my story now. This is me. What about all of those, comic book pages with those amazing anatomy and the accurate proportions and the dynamic poses? How do I learn how to do that stuff? I'm not going to learn it here in art school. And then I find myself in workshops or in the library, just looking for that knowledge. All right, so I think I have something. I also want you to notice that having a tone underneath, you see I'm working in a style that allows for some gaps here and there. It's kind of similar to what happens with misregistration and printmaking, maybe woodcut. That can be part of the aesthetic that I'm aiming for. But having those gaps be just stark white, or even just show a transparency grid, I don't think that's a good idea. I like having something underneath so I can see my holes, I call them holes, the holes in the color layer, and then address them as I work. And so for these last few passes, I'm just going to be just finessing some of the edges, some of the color. And because Photoshop now has this really useful version of its color picker with the circle, like finally a literal colored wheel, which a lot of us learned from. I think I can work out the transitions so that from light to dark a bit easily. If I was working in traditional media right now, I would have on my palette, let's say I have this red. I would also mix it maybe with some titanium white to get that lighter color, and then I would make a little gradient between those two. And then I would be able to pick up paint and go back and forth between my palette and the painting. And that's the approach I would use with this traditional media. Because I'm working with, where did I put that on? Because I'm working with digital, I need to be able to see those values clearly, those gradients clearly, or I might set them up on their own layer like this. When you get further along in your piece, you might get to a point where you have all the colors you're looking for. Some of you might have already experienced this. And that's when you can start, so if I'm looking for a more shadow color in here, I can option click and then start painting that. Okay, I'm on the click layer. Okay. Guess I can paint that out. All right, so the last steps here is just going to be a matter of this decision making, design. Do I spend more time and get the secondary values in here on my bell pepper? There are these subtle, really smooth plane changes along these ridges that I can see, and I get excited about them, and have the potential of maybe observing them and recording them in piece. But I have to ask myself, are they even necessary? One thing I am noticing is the fact that there's an orangeness that's happening along the top as the bell pepper gets sort of closer to the light source. The shadows themselves, they don't necessarily have to be this brown, but I do get sort of an overall, almost analogous color scheme, where these are all in kind of this range, the yellows up through to the reds, including it in the shadows. So that could be part of my strategy and the statement I want to make about the subject. So as long as I stay in that range, these colors are going to just naturally sort of family together. I don't know if that's even a natural verb, but they're going to relate to one another more clearly. It's funny, at this stage, as much as I should be looking at the still life, sometimes I forget about it, and I'm looking more at the relationships between everything in the composition, and I'm trying to get everything to balance. I feel like right now I went too far with the darkness and the saturation of the shadows, so I might dial that back again. Maybe this whole area needs to be knocked back or brought even closer to the value of the background so that I'm more focused on this part of the composition. Maybe I need to reduce the contrast along the surface of the carrot as it gets closer to the light source. Okay. And then lastly, limiting myself to a brush. I'm still on that same inking brush. Limiting myself to a brush that will not allow me to build up color with transparency. I think that's actually working to my advantage because that's something with the cutting board there. I think that's working to my advantage because I'm just dealing with a limited palette overall. I get this to work, and later I could have time to really make changes here and there, and figure out which details to work on. Okay. So these subtle transitions are happening just with me sampling color and then going over here and either getting closer to the light, closer to the shadow, or closer to the pure hue with the saturation. And that's just happening throughout. That's letting me get more information, more modeling the form. Don't forget to look at the thing you're painting. Sometimes it's just, you live it both, right? This is the art itself is its own living thing. Until you turn off the palette and it's gone. Okay, folks, so that was 20 minutes. So if you have not taken on a still life of some kind, hopefully this is going to show you another working method for making that happen. Okay, thanks everyone. See you in the next video. And this will be the last video for this series. So next move into some painting techniques. moving beyond grayscale and line art and just doing some real painting with different types of brushes, etc., etc. Okay, thanks everyone.